fine, brother.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so very warm welcome to everyone, and particularly warm welcome to Matthew Appleton, who's talking to us from Bristol. And we've had Matthew quite a few times now, talking about his work with babies and families, which is wonderful. And tonight he's going to be talking about resilience in a time of crisis, primal anxieties and ancestral wisdom. So over to you, Matthew. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John, for the invitation. And thank you, everyone, for attending this evening. I'm sure many of you have spent lots of time online. So thank you for making some more time for this. So I'd like to just invite everyone, before we begin, to take a few moments just to feel your body, just to make yourself really comfortable. Just pay attention to how you're sitting. Make sure you're really comfortable. And just pay a little bit of attention to the inner world of the body, the sensations of the body. Make sure your sitting bones are really supported by your chair. Your spine is supported. You're breathing. Feeling your feet on the floor. And just take a moment to notice how you are at the moment. If there's anything you need to do just so you can be more present, just do what you need to do so you can be really present. Okay, thank you. So, like many people, I've been through quite a range of different emotions over the last few weeks as we've moved into this very unknown period. And as I've been reflecting on this and seeing it also as an opportunity to get interested as to how we respond to crisis, I've related that to my own work, and I hope that what we'll be looking at today will add something perhaps new to the dialogue around resilience and being with the unknown. There's obviously a lot of very good information out there, a lot of very good supportive programs. So as I say, I hope this is something that has just a different dimension. And one of the things that inspired me to do this talk when John invited me was through the work I've been doing with groups, with adults exploring their own prenatal and birth experience. And I've been in contact with various people. I know some of you will be here this evening listening, but different groups, particularly in Germany and in Italy. And I've really begun to get very clear about how in times of crisis, these very early patterns can get stimulated, and how if we can come into relationship with them, if we can see them for what they are, it gives us a much greater capacity to be with what is. And so one of the things I would like to suggest is whatever you're experiencing, however you are experiencing this particular period, that it will be influenced by what has already happened to you. And so we're going to look into the world of the baby, and I'm going to hopefully do a little bit of magic here. Hopefully all my years of study at Hogwarts will work, and we will enter the world of the baby. So why is the world of the baby, the prenatal and the newborn, so important in terms of this particular crisis we're going through? Well, one of the reasons for that is that for most of us, the times when we felt most threatened, or I could say we were most vulnerable, our survival was perhaps most in doubt or challenged, is when we were in the womb or at birth or in the year just after birth, in which this period where we're particularly vulnerable to the environment letting us down. We're very dependent on the environment to manage our own stress levels, to manage our sense of safety in the world. And for some of us, that early experience wasn't always so safe. And one of the things we've learned over the years is that these experiences get held very deeply in our cells, in our bodies, in our neurology, and in our psyche. And so these very early experiences can get profoundly stimulated when our present moment environment seems to be lacking in some way, seems to be letting us down in some way, seems uncertain. And so historically, it's been believed in, certainly in Western psychology, we don't remember these early periods of life. Now we know that that's completely untrue. And we talk about implicit memory as opposed to explicit memory. An implicit memory is very much a body memory. So it's very much held in the body, and we may experience particular shifts in our autonomic nervous system and in the inner sensations, and also with images and strong emotions, which relate to these implicit memories. And they may be, as I say, stimulated by what's happening in the present. If there's some resonance between what's happening in the present and what happened to us earlier when we were very, very vulnerable. Okay, so I'd like to just look a little bit at ancient cultures, and particularly at the very ancient cultures that really put the feminine at the core of their cultural life, that were particularly focused on the image, the archetype of the mother, and that this was very much connected with the earth as well. So we talk about Mother Earth, for example. We talk about the Earth Mother. And these statues here really are showing us how these cultures related to these aspects of the feminine as being nurturing, as being fertile, so a source of comfort, a source of food, of nourishment. And the really developed around about 5,000 years ago as we moved from hunter-gatherers into the agricultural cultures. Now, we also see this in the mythology of slightly later cultures. So this is Ceres, who is the Roman god of fertility, of agriculture. This is also where where we get the word cereal. So you can see she's holding here this sheath of wheat, of corn. So again, we see this link between the environment and the sense of the feminine, the maternal. And you can see here that she's revealing a maternal breast here. So we can imagine that the people of these times, they were very much engaged with a world that felt animated by the gods, by spirit, an ensouled world which they could interact with. They had a deep relationship with. If there were failings in the crops, for example, they might make offerings to Ceres or one of the other deities. Now, we've changed very much in relationship to how we relate to our environment. And we can think of the very early womb life and this very early period of relying on the mother, the first year of life after, as being like, this is like an extended womb. And we can also see how this will also influence the way we perceive the world, we perceive the environment. So we've moved now from the gods and the goddesses through to Amazon. So we, instead of praying to the gods and the goddesses, having that direct sense of being part of an inspirited, ensouled world, we have our internet, and when we contact Amazon or whoever to get what we need. And of course, when that fails us, that can feel very threatening to us. We've probably all had the experience of the Amazon parcel not arriving on time, or the little slip coming through the door saying, "We just missed you," and it often invokes quite strong feelings. So particularly at times when there seems to be a failing in this, in our now very human and to some degree mechanized system, where do we go with those feelings? What do we do with these very primal anxieties that are getting stimulated here? So when we see something like this, we see the shelves emptied, it clearly is going to evoke some anxiety for all of us. When we hear about things on the news or read things in the papers or on social media that feel like they are, again, showing failings in the environment, we're not coping so well, we start to panic. Now, to some degree, this is natural. Our nervous systems are geared towards searching for danger in the environment. This is a very, very ancient response. We wouldn't have survived if we didn't have that particular alertness to what's happening in the environment. It goes also back to the hunter-gatherers and the times when you had to be alert for the wolves or the lions or whatever may have been threatening life-threatening in the environment. But our nervous systems are really geared towards seeing the danger, being able to respond to the danger, and then come back to feeling, we're safe, we're okay. But when we have this kind of long-term sense of danger in the environment, which we're being exposed to all the time through social media and through our encounters with scenes like this, then of course our nervous systems become very overstimulated. And particularly in relationship to the very early anxieties, the nervous system can become even more overstimulated if these very early imprints are being activated. Michel Audin talked about the primal period, which is from conception to 9 months after birth, and how our nervous systems are set a little bit like a thermostat to kind of come on to suddenly alert us that there's danger. And if there's a lot of unresolved stress or trauma from early in life, it means that our nervous systems are set like a thermostat, which is too high. So we're going to talk about very early experience now. So we're just going to take a look. I'm just going to do a little move around there. We're going to now look, sorry, I'm going to move you back there. Okay, we're going to look at the life in the womb and how this womb environment, it used to be people thought it was like a paradise, but now actually we're seeing that the womb environment may have many different emotional tones to it, some of them which are very stressful. And I know from my own experience, one of the things that happened to me in my prenatal life was my mother almost miscarried with me. And for some time, she had to lie very, very still because it wasn't safe for her to move because she may have lost me. So the imprint of that experience was something that I carried in the cells of my body and my neurology for a very, very long time. And we call this a catastrophe imprint. It's like the catastrophe, the threat of something terrible happening becomes really deeply rooted in the psyche and in our body's memory. And through doing a lot of work with that, my own experiential work, I was able to really see where that came from and to release some of the stress related with that. So I know for sure if this situation had happened to me 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it would have been a very, very different experience for me. That catastrophe imprint would have got activated. So one thing I'd like to invite everyone to be curious about is how do you feel that your very early life may be influencing how you are feeling about what's happening now? So another variation on that about 1 in 10 people have is prenatal twin loss. So it can be very early in prenatal life. There are two prenates and one disappears, and the parents don't always know that happens. But again, if this is part of your history, you may also have this catastrophe imprint, and that will be particularly activated by your concerns for perhaps a close one. Someone else is going to disappear here, going to die. It's like an exaggerated fear or a highly charged fear. It isn't necessarily really in relationship with what's happening now. So again, I want to emphasize all these kind of fears. They are very natural, and we will all have certain aspects of that through our situation touch, but we can also get curious about if there is a deeper, earlier experience that may be getting activated. So one of the primary imprints that can get activated in a time like this is around our prenatal umbilical experience. So the umbilical cord brings to us nutrition and oxygen, and at the same time waste substances are finding their way out through the umbilical cord, but it's our prenatal lifeline. Now, one of the things we found through doing experiential work is that there are 3 main themes that tend to constellate around umbilical issues, and these are related to food, money, and intimacy. So as you can imagine, this is a time when these very early imprints are very likely to get stimulated. So why does it relate to this? Because we are getting what we need from the outside world through the umbilical cord prenatally. As adults, and of course as children as well, we then get that through food and through money. That's all nourishing. It helps us to survive. And of course, intimacy is a relational dynamic with the umbilical cord. It's our relationship with our mother. And so if we are at the moment having to isolate, if we're on our own, it can touch really early abandonment issues. If we're not getting enough in terms of what we want for food, it can also stimulate these very early themes. And of course, many of us have anxieties around money at the moment. So these themes are likely to be up. So the umbilical issues, I would say, are probably the primary themes that for many of us will be getting activated right now. Okay, moving on to birth itself. So this is, I just love this picture of this newborn baby. It's just such a present little baby here. There's a water birth and it's still got the cord attached. So there can be many themes that get stimulated through birth. For example, at the beginning of the labor, if the baby is engaged with the cervix and the cervix is not open, the baby cannot get out. The baby has that sense of being stuck inside. There's no way out. So you can imagine, again, this is a particular anxiety that may get stimulated for people at this time, and we're not allowed out. We have to stay in. So you can really stimulate that sense of the stuck cervix. Also, interventions during the birth can be quite activated at this time. So for example, if we are getting forceps or vacuum extractions or painkillers or drugs to speed up the birth, these are all, well, these can all be sensed as an authority from the outside, pushing us to do something that we don't want to do, or to stop us from doing what we want to do. And again, these, as we see the restrictions coming, we can be curious about, well, how much of these early imprints are being activated? It's, of course, we may have all sorts of rational feelings about this. To raise questions about this is very, very important. To question what's being asked of us is very important. But if there's a strong activation, it could be that something in you has already experienced this in a way that was so overwhelming that you're becoming overwhelmed now. So these are the kind of primal anxieties I'm thinking of. It's just a very quick overview of them, because we could spend a lot of time going more deeply into these. But if we can be aware at least that our present moment experience is being stimulated by this early experience, we can start to look after what we might say is the baby in us, the young part of us that's getting activated. And I would say that the primary feedback I've had from people who've done the experiential work around their own births and their prenatal life is being able to see the imprint, to be able to have a relationship with the imprint. This creates an adult, an inner adult that can be with the inner baby. Now, if we don't have that, then we get flooded by all the feelings we may have felt when we were in that baby state. So something over the next few days you might want to do is just get curious about your own story, maybe do a little bit of research for yourself, and maybe you can ask yourself, I wonder what aspects of my early story is getting stimulated. Now, I'd like to offer a few kind of first aid ways of being with these patterns. So obviously, we're not going to be doing any deep regressive research here, but what we can do is orient to the present moment. So one of the things that usually happens is when we get flooded by the stress hormones and the nervous system activation related with these very early stages, is we start to create a story around it. We start to tell ourselves that we're not safe. We start to worry about what's going to happen tomorrow or in a few weeks' time. So we're not staying present with our experience as it is. Now, I'm sure many people have all sorts of techniques for working with that. So I'd just like to suggest a couple more, which again, they can give us a little bit of space, a bit of distance from the stories that may be running us. So what I'd like to ask you to do now is just take a moment to become aware of your sense of hearing. And just listen for a moment to the background sounds. If you get distracted, just bring your attention back to hearing. And then take a look around. wherever you are now, just take a look around your room. Just notice all the different things in your room. Get interested in your own room. Turn your head as you're doing it. And then start to take a little bit of a sniff. What does your room smell like? Are there any lions in the room? And then just ask yourself, based on your present moment experience, am I safe right now? Okay, well, I hope everybody is. presuming you are, this is a very good, very easy process to do when you are starting to get caught up in stories, starting to get caught up in all these kind of messages from the outside world saying you're not safe. And this, of course, is what our ancestors would have done. They would have been orienting to the environment. We look around, am I safe? We listen. Is there something coming? We smell, is there that smell of lion or some other predator? So we can call upon our senses to remind us, actually, we're okay. Now, there's another way of deepening into this I'd like to suggest, and this takes a little bit longer, so we'll just take a few minutes to do this. But as a preamble to that, I just want to talk about the nature of the heart. And in my work with training people to work with babies, we do a lot of focusing on the heart, not just as a metaphor, but the heart as a center of intelligence and of knowing, which is something that many Indigenous people were very aware of. Many Indigenous people say the center of our intelligence is here, it's not up here. And this has been backed up by modern science, particularly many of you will know the research of the Heart Math Center, where they found that the heart has a very strong electromagnetic field. It's much bigger than the electromagnetic field of the brain. These fields can be measured. And that a lot of information is coming from the heart to the brain. And there are actually more nerves running from the heart to the brain than the other way around. And the heart field is responding more quickly to the environment than the brain is. And these can be measured. So again, the brain is where we tend to get caught up in all the stories. The heart doesn't tell us those stories. The heart is just here in the here and now. It just is, and it knows. So what I'd like to ask you to do, this little exercise will take us about 3 minutes. So what I'd like to ask you to do is just take a hand and put it on your heart center, wherever you feel your heart center to be. And just breathe into the contact with your own hand. And I'd like to ask you to see if you can get a sense of dropping your awareness out of your head and into your heart. Now, you've just checked out through your senses that you are safe. Right now, in this moment, you are safe. So, with your hand on your heart, just tell yourself, you are safe. have a sense of saying the words from your heart. You are safe. Every time you get caught up in thinking again, just bring your attention back to the contact with your heart. And repeat the words. You are safe. And just notice any subtle changes in your inner sensations as you repeat the words. You are safe. And just again, you are safe. Really feel those words in your heart. You are safe. And when you're ready, just start to come out of that contact with your heart. So I hope you notice some shift in sensation in your nervous system as you worked with that exercise. And again, this helps us to come into the present, to just create some space from the thoughts that may be running for us and these very early primal anxieties that may be getting stimulated. And I would recommend this as something, if you're feeling anxious, to do, particularly before you go to sleep at night. Because very often our anxiety emerges in not sleeping well and in bad dreams. So it's a way of actually being able to really remind yourself that actually you are safe and to go into sleep from that place of safety. Okay, so I'm going to move on again. I'd like to talk a little bit more now here about ancestral wisdom. So I'm going to, again, do a little bit of Hogwarts magic and just bring up these ancient rock carvings this is from Scotland. These are in an area called Kilmartin. There they have some very beautiful Neolithic sites, which I find very deeply moving. They really connect me with the earth and with the ancestors. So the ancestors creep up quite a lot in the work that we are doing with birth regressions and prenatal regressions. And so I consider the ancestral field to be very, almost like an extension of the womb. The ancestral field informs the womb. And we very often think of ancestral issues as being traumatic issues, unresolved issues, which certainly can show up. But an aspect of the ancestral field that I think often gets neglected is what I call the ancestral wisdom field. And human beings go back about 2 million years. The first kind of behaviors we saw that were kind of uniquely human, like drying out furs, making places to stay, encampments, fashioning tools, goes back about 2 million years, which is a pretty long time. And if you just take a moment to consider what your ancestors had to go through so that you can be here right now. If you think about the conditions, the massive climate changes that happened, the wars, the famines, and your ancestors survived. You are from a long line of survivors. We would not be here if our parents and grandparents, and going back at least 2 million years, had not found their way through these difficulties. Now, I'd like to tell you about a particular experience of mine, which was connected with my ancestral field. And it actually happened when I was doing some ritual work with some Native American elders, 2 women, one from the Lakota tribe, one from the Mohawk tribe. And we did a whole week of ritual and sweat lodges, and it was a very profound experience. And one of the things that happened for me was I started to experience over several days what I can only describe as a waking dream. And in that waking dream, I had the experience of being in a tunnel. It was like there was a tunnel around me, and there was, at the end of a tunnel, a light and figures in the light. And it reminded me very much of the type of imagery we see with people who describe the near-death experience. So I've used this particular image because my experience in this waking dream was very much like the tunnel had this kind of ribbed quality. And I could see these figures at the end, and for several days I was really wondering to myself, whoa, what's going on here? And who are those figures? Everything else was going on as normal, but like I say, it was like a dreamscape that I was also living in. And then after several days, I was able to dialogue with one of the figures at the end of the tunnel. And this figure revealed himself as my maternal grandfather. Now, I have never known my grandfathers. Both of them died before I was born. And I always said to myself, I don't have grandfathers. And in this dream dialogue, he said to me, I am your grandfather. Don't forget that. Please remember. And it was a very, very moving experience. It profoundly changed something for me in terms of my relationship with my whole ancestral field, and particularly this sense of, wow, yes, I do have at least a grandfather. It felt like something very deep in me got healed. Now, my own personal take on this, we may have many different takes on this, is I'm not a spiritualist. I don't believe our ancestors are kind of floating out there like little disembodied egos, just waiting to make contact with us. That's not my particular take on it. My sense is there's something far more mysterious, far more profound, that is very hard to understand from our own particular egoic perspective of seeing ourselves as separate from other people. And one of the things that Carl Jung, that great Swiss psychologist, talked about was the collective unconscious. And I do need to change this one around so you can see the writing on this. So he described the our more conscious world of the ego being a bit like the tip of the iceberg, and underneath this we have the collective unconsciousness, our personal unconscious, which of course Freud talked about, but there's also the collective unconscious. And when we really begin to engage deeply with the collective unconscious, which is where I feel the ancestral field lives, if you like, we could say where the dead live, is that it's something we will never really understand from this perspective of the tip of the iceberg above the water. But we can know it. We can relate to it, we can engage with it. Jung always said that part of the psyche exists outside of everyday space and time, and this is something which I have come to accept as an absolute truth. It's something which I experience, and this, in my experiences, is where we meet our ancestors. So it's not that they've gone, it's like in some way they're always with us. And of course, if we're talking about part of the psyche being outside of the everyday time and space, we're talking about an eternal now. And so, of course, by the same token, we are ancestors to those who will come, and we can also connect them with those who will come. Again, I'd like to say, I don't think this is something we can understand, but we can know. And for me, the human soul, which is a very embodied experience, is very much how we relate, how we connect in with this aspect of ourselves outside of space and time, the collective unconscious. Now, when we talk about ancestors, I've particularly been talking about the my blood ancestors, like my maternal grandfather. Now, many cultures honor the ancestors in ways we don't. I just want to show you this. This is an African altar. I'll try and get out of the way here. An African altar dedicated to the ancestors, and you can see how much work they've put into that, how important that is, how central it is to their understanding. And also, just to show you a more simple example of that, there's a quite like this one. It's very simple with, again, I'm just going to try and move out the way here. You see the guy there in the photograph, they've given him some food and a cigarette, so he clearly liked his puff on a cigarette at the end of the day. And again, I have my own particular place in the house for doing ancestral work. And it's something which I would say is very, very powerful. And I would encourage people to think about, to perhaps engage with. I'm just going to go, again, I'm going to go back to the Neolithic period now. So again, our ancestors have left their mark on the external landscape, and I would like to say they've left their mark and are still present in our internal landscapes too. And when we talk about ancestors, we may have some anxiety about that, because there are always aspects of the ancestral line that we may not feel comfortable with. But for the moment, I'd say don't focus on this. Just for a moment, consider that there may be a deep wisdom there based on ancestors finding their way through so many difficult periods in the Earth's history. And if blood ancestors don't feel right for you, you can also think about spiritual ancestors. Who are those? Who for you are your spiritual ancestors? Those people who have really inspired you, who you may think of as being in the past, but you might be able to have a present moment dialogue with, a present moment conversation with. So ancestors here we can use in quite a wide term. And you don't need to have an altar for the ancestors to engage with them, but it can be a nice way of really potentizing that relationship, to really focus it. But for the moment, I'd like to just again do a very brief internal exercise to connect in with the ancestors. And the language of the soul, as Jung really stressed, was the deep imagination. We're not talking here about cognitively figuring things out. We're talking about going into our inner world and connecting with imagery. We often think of the imagination as being fantasy, but this is a very shallow way of understanding the imagination. But the psyche can really get us in contact with very profound images which have a life of their own. And again, I would say this is where we really can connect in with the ancestors. So let's take a moment, and I'd like to ask you again, just to feel your sitting bones on the chair. Just take a few breaths. Become aware of the inner sensations of the body. Closing your eyes, bringing your attention inside. And as you bring your attention in, you might become aware of a sense of inner luminosity, an inner radiance. So that your inner world is both dark because you're closing your eyes, but there's a inner radiance, a little like the way that the moonlight illuminates the nighttime. Just rest your awareness in that inner luminosity. What we've often found by exploring the early work of the life of the womb, the early life of the baby, is that we each have a particular relationship with an ancestor, a ancestor. That we have a particular resonance with an ancestor. It may be somebody quite recent, like a grandparent, an auntie, an uncle who's no longer alive, great-grandparents. It may be somebody that we are aware of, or it may be somebody we don't know. It may go back a long way. What I'd like to invite you to do, and if it doesn't feel right for you, of course, don't do it. But if you're happy to explore it, is just to ask for an image of an ancestor, one of your ancestors, to show themselves to your mind's eye. Just let the image arise. Don't try to understand it. Don't push it away. Very often we doubt, dismiss, because we've learned not to trust our own internal world of images and sensations. to just accept what comes. The image of a particular ancestor, someone that you have a particular resonance with. Maybe a blood ancestor, maybe a spiritual ancestor. And acknowledge them. Just say hello, welcome them. If you can, just open your heart to them being here. And ask them if there's something that they would like to say to you or show you today. They may say something, they may make some kind of gesture to you. Don't try to understand it. You can stay with the image. Let the image unfold inside you over the next few days or even weeks. Just accept whatever the ancestor says or shows. If nothing came in this particular exercise, don't worry about it. Please don't dismiss it either. Just acknowledge for yourself that here in this context may not have been the right place for you to connect in. It's something you can do later. If something did come for you, then again, just honor that, acknowledge it, and just take a moment to thank your ancestor for showing up today. Thank them for whatever they offered you today, even if you don't understand it and know what to do with it. You can explore that. And then when you're ready, I'd like to ask you to find your own way to opening your eyes. Maybe move your wrists and your ankles a little bit to feel yourself present in the room. And if you did get a particular symbol from the ancestor, and maybe they gave you something or showed you something, you can get curious about that by exploring the mythological meaning of that symbol. You can find lots of information online or in books on symbology, and then see what in that speaks to you. If there was a particular gesture, then just get curious about it. Let the experience gestate in you. Very often the psyche works much more slowly than the more cognitive question in mind. And also you might find once you begin to build the relationship with the ancestor, it gets stronger, and it may show up in your dreams as well. So you can continue to explore this. And as I say, if it didn't work for you today, maybe, if you're curious, you can try another time and give it longer. We just touched in the time frame we got today. So I'm now going to come back to my room here in Bristol. And John, I'm happy if there are any thoughts or questions that people have. Yeah, I'm up for those.
Great. Yeah. So if you've got any questions, you can just put them in the chat box there. And I know we've got quite a few people watching on YouTube as well, who unfortunately can't put questions, well, unless you can put comments in the bottom there. But so yes, anybody got any comments or questions? Thank you, Matthew. That's beautiful. Really beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
You were starting off talking about sort of early imprints that can come up in this situation now. And one of the things I've noticed with these kind of early patterns, I suppose, because so a lot of them are around kind of survival, that we want to act quickly, or there's an impulse to sort of resolve things quickly in that. Do you know what I mean? That something needs to change fast, like
Yes.
now, kind of thing. So so to be able to take a step back, like you were saying, is really helpful, isn't it? So rather than just go immediately into those kind of things.
Well, one of the things I've really noticed from the people that have done the experiential work around these themes, and I would say it's a very consistent factor, is the capacity to be with tension and to bear it. And to be with difficulty and bear it without needing to respond from that very quick, I need to make a change now. And so again, I think that says something about how these early imprints can be so activating for us that it's almost impossible to be present with them. We act. So if we can create that space from them, it gives us that space to slow down and begin to get curious and interested in the situation, which is lovely, actually, when you can shift from having to get out of a situation to being interested in it.
Yeah, wonderful. There's a question here from Louise from Copenhagen. Any thoughts on mamas birthing at this time or being pregnant now, she says.
Hi, Louise.
I'm sure you've got thoughts on that.
Well, of course, there is a huge field of social stress at the moment, as well as the stress that the health services are under. And all of us will react differently to that. And that includes, of course, birthing mothers. So I think anything that can help to create that sense of safety around birthing mothers, because that's so important, is going to be really valuable. And I know your work is very involved in that. So if we can create the safety, the containment, that will certainly relieve the stress, which is very hard not to get caught up in because it's in our collective field at the moment. For me, because your expertise, of course, is much more around working with birthing mothers. Mine is much more around working with babies. So I'm going to be very interested in what's going to be happening for the babies who we meet in our practices, who were born during this time. So again, just to remember that they will be having an experience too. And we've not in our lifetime seen anything like this on such a profound collective level. So I cannot imagine it will not affect those babies. But I would like to say it could actually be very positive. It doesn't necessarily have to be negative, but that it will have an effect for sure. Thank you.
We've got to wind up in a sec. There's a few questions coming in.
John?
Sorry?
There's a couple of questions in the Q&A as well. Have you seen those?
Oh, sorry, no. I'll have a look at those. Yeah. Okie dokie. Oh yeah, this has come up twice. Can you say a bit more about the ancestral field?
It's a mystery. It's something that I've been researching for a very, very long time, and I think there are many ways to see it. Again, I don't think it's something we can understand cognitively. I think only through engaging with it we can begin to get to know it ourselves, have a direct experience of it. There are a few books now on the subject, you can check out, there's one called Ancestral Medicine, which is very good. Jung's work on the ancestors, I think, is very good. So I think really it's a matter of finding a form to explore it and to find your own direct experience with it, rather than me being able to define it in any particular way. And I think the important thing is, does it feel meaningful for you? For me, it has certainly felt meaningful. It's not something I was interested in at all until I started to engage with the early birth work and the womb work, and saw how powerful the ancestral field was. But I would say it's like, for example, in constellations work, they talk about the knowing field. And when we do the work in the experiential work with adults, and sometimes with babies too, we can often get a sense of the ancestors in the room. It's like a felt presence in the room. And the interesting thing I found about that is I've very often been able to say to somebody, do you get a sense of something over there? And when they pay attention to it, they start to describe an ancestor, which is exactly how I or other people in the room have perceived it. So, you know, very specific details. So there is more in heaven and earth than we will ever know.
Thanks, Matthew. We just have one more question. Is that okay for you?
I'm up for it.
Okay.
I'm on a roll now.
You definitely are. Yeah. Yes, you are. So from Michelle, says, could the cardiocentric breathing being considered a tool to increase our capacity to communicate heart to heart, and in a sense connecting this eternal now?
Yeah. So I could talk for hours about this. So one of the interesting things that the Heart Math Institute found was, because what they were doing is they were measuring the electromagnetic field of the heart in relationship to random images showing up on the computer. And so, for example, what they found is if there was an unpleasant image, that the frequency of the heart would become very incoherent. And if there was a pleasant image, that it became more coherent. Now, what we know from these studies is when we have coherent waveforms in our heart field, that they start to entrain with other heart fields. So we feel connected with other people. When we're in states where we're very anxious or very angry about something, it becomes incoherent, and therefore we often feel very alone. We probably all had that experience of, when I feel very distressed, I feel alone, or when I'm really angry, I'm feeling alone. And so when we drop into the heart space, we can start to actually affect other people's heart fields and help them to become more coherent. So this is something that we train all the people in our integrative baby therapy trainings to do, to actually connect in with the heart field and to entrain with other heart fields in the family system to help create a coherent field to work with the baby. But the other very interesting thing that the Heart Math Center found was that the heart field responded to these images on the computer before the images actually came on the screen. It was just milliseconds. It's a short time, but it's significant from a scientific point of view. So that the heart field was actually, we could say, predicting the image. It was knowing the image was going to come before the image came. So this again gives us that sense that the heart itself is probably where the psyche connects outside of space and time. And we also find this in terms of our regressive work as well, that that there is a particular relationship with our heart, which is felt to be connected with a unity consciousness. We may say where we all originated from. And so we even find sometimes that breech babies are orienting to their mother's hearts because they're orienting to the heart field of the mother to feel contact, and also contact with that place where they came from, that kind of more unified consciousness. So we're talking about really transpersonal aspects of human life now, rather than what we know through the more ego-based psychology, which is most common in our culture now.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Matthew. Great. So I think we're going to
And
wind up now, and I hope you're keeping well. You obviously are keeping well. Wonderful.
Thank you.
And so just to say that if you want to find out about Matthew and Jenny's work, this if you did look up conscious embodiment trainings, there's a variety of courses that I know you offer, both also including sort of earth wisdom courses as well, isn't it? So
yes, absolutely.
have a look at the Conscious Embodiment Trainings website. We have another program coming up next week. So on Tuesday, we have Kathy Dooley, Dr. Kathy Dooley, who's from New York. She's going to be talking about, well, her title of her talk is Taking the Gross Out of Gross Anatomy and Putting the Fun Back into Function. So that sounds quite good. She does a lot of body painting of anatomy and things like that. It's wonderful. Wednesday, we have the third in the series with John Sharkey on assessment. Those of you who've seen John in action, he's a wonderful presenter. So that's on Wednesday at 7. And on Thursday next week, I'm going to be talking about 50 ways to engage the vagus and our social engagement system. So we were going to call it 50 Shades of the Vagus, but we didn't do that. Because that would give the wrong message. So thank you very much, everybody. And thank you especially to Matthew for being here. Thank you.
Also, thank you, John, and everyone for attending. And I wish you good health and ongoing curiosity as we move through this situation.
Thank you. Thanks, Matthew. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.